LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I
filed my return,
but I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though. I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Refreshing Wild Cherry Cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
Hello and welcome to the Billowing Hilltop podcast. Yes, it's me. We're cooking up all sorts of things for you at the moment in the command pod, but while that's all been going on, I have been lucky enough to chat to Gareth Hanrahan. Gareth, if you're not familiar already, is a game designer. He's an adventure designer. He's a novelist. He wrote the Mongoose Traveller Core rulebook. He's worked on Paranoia. He's worked on the Laundry Files for Cubicle 7. He wrote the legendary Pirates of Drinax long-form adventure for Traveller. He's written for Free League, for The One Ring. He's worked for Pelgrane Press. He's worked for Cubicle 7. His list of credits is extraordinary. Gareth came into the command pod to talk to us about his new project, which is called the Metadungeon, that he is designing for Rowan, Rook and Deckard, who are a fantastic British game design company. That's going to be launching through a back kit. All these details are in the chat, so I suppose I better stop burbling on and let us push on with this bonus chat episode of the Billowing Hilltop podcast, Mega Dungeon Men. Hello and welcome to the Billowing Hilltop. Hello, readers. I'm here in the command pod with Gareth. Hello, Gareth. Come in. Yeah, come in, sit down. Not there. No, not there.
Oh,
that's
sorry.
Yeah, just clear a space. I'm sorry about the mess.
No worries.
We haven't really been using this place very much recently. Now, Gareth Hanrahan is a writer, game designer, adventure designer. The list does go kind of on and on, does it not, Gareth?
I've been around a while and I've been prolific, so
yeah, exactly.
A long list there.
Prolific is the perfect word. But what Gareth is working on currently, amongst, I suspect, a zillion other things, is a project called the Metadungeon.
Yeah.
Which seems to, on the face of it, rather well align with the fact that our fellow elders of the Hilltop are all, well, we've all knocked around a bit and played a bit of D&D over many years. So, Gareth, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then tell us a little bit about the Metadungeon, and we're going to have to get into how that then interacts with the Die role-playing game.
Fair enough. Okay, the quick preface of me. I said I'm a writer and game designer. I've been working in the game industry for more than 20 years at this point, which is a terrifying thought. And in that time, I've written many books. A couple of recent highlights. We've got Moria for The One Ring.
Yeah.
Pirates of Drinax. Lots of stuff for Pelgrane Press. Lots of stuff for Cubicle 7. Lots of stuff for Free League. And for Rook and Deckard, I did Dagger in the Heart, which is the adventure or the campaign for their Heart role-playing game. And so my next thing for them is going to be the Metadungeon for Die.
The Heart role-playing game, I know a little bit about.
Heart is basically you're going through this weird meat hell surreal dungeon underground where basically it's all like strange forces and eldritch goblins and tentacle things, and I did a dungeon for that, or actually a campaign for that called Dagger in the Heart, where you're basically trying to hijack the psychic equivalent of the London Underground and use that as a shortcut to transcendence, which was great fun.
I mean, and then the Metadungeon is not for the Heart role-playing game.
The Metadungeon is for Die. Die is a comic book and role-playing game by Kieran Gillen. The basic premise of Die is that the characters are people from the real world who get dragged into a world based on fantasy role-playing games, a la the old D&D cartoon or something.
Yeah.
And you're encouraged to sort of have aspects of the player characters' real lives be reflected in the fantasy setting. So basically, the Lich talks like your boss. You basically resolve your long-running marital issues by having an affair with the Elf Queen. And as part of the comic, it sort of goes through the history of where the role-playing hobby came from. It explores how the medium came to be. So basically, in the comic, they encounter like shadows of Tolkien and the Brontes and the German Kriegspiel designers to basically see how role-playing games evolved as a concept.
Got it.
On the role-playing game.
Yeah.
Now, Metadungeon is focused very much on the history of the role-playing hobby as explored through a role-playing game. So...
Right. But it's a mega dungeon as well as a meta dungeon.
Exactly, yes. It's going to be 6 levels from the
Right.
like level 1 is going to the 1970s, level 2 the 80s, level 3 the 90s.
Nice.
4 2000s and so forth. So basically you effectively be encountering, what's the best way to not say legally actionable?
Yeah, you'll be very careful here.
Reflections of and shadows and shades of famous game designers, famous games. So we basically tracing the history of the hobby through role-playing game.
We started in the 70s. This will probably resonate with us.
Indeed.
A lot of this.
So the first level is going to be exploring the history of TSR and the other early D&D spin-offs, and basically the foundation of TSR, the relationship of Gygax and Arneson, through the medium of a classic typical wide corridor dungeon.
Got it.
You go through that dungeon, explore. It's not just going to be a dungeon crawl, because in Die you create both your persona, which is your real world, like your normal person, and your paragon as your hero gets dragged in. So there'll be also advice about integrating your persona's background and so forth, and that reflected in the dungeon. We're probably going to have an opening section, which is going to be a combination of the village of Hamlet from Elemental Evil and the town of Braunstein. You familiar with the Braunsteins?
No.
Basically, the precursor to roleplay games were these war games set in this town called Braunstein. Instead of just playing like you're the general, you're the opposing general, they have like 20 players, and you're the attacking general, you're the mayor of the town, you're the head of the students' union of the college. So the mayor could go, I don't want my town to be attacked. So basically, it's sort of the intermediate step between role-playing games and war games. So Gygax and Arneson both played these games and went, oh, this is a really good idea.
Yes.
So that'd be the first level of Metadungeon, and then you'll hack your way down through that, and suddenly you'll throw open a door and be into this vast kingdom with basically, because the 80s is where role-playing expands out of the dungeon. We got the wilderness level, effectively. You've got Traveller, you've got Call of Cthulhu, you've got Western Game Star Wars, Paranoia, Rift, RuneQuest. Gaming goes from just being D&D there were a couple of non-D&D variants back in the 70s, but the 80s it really explodes out in different options.
You did some stuff with Traveller, didn't you?
I did the Mongoose version of Traveller.
So that was wow.
Then with the 90s, which is going to be dominated by White Wolf to a large degree, and also Magic, and also the sort of early stages of the indie scene.
Yeah.
Then the 2000s is going to be the Pathfinder D&D OGL exploding and that whole...
craziness.
Yeah. That's when I started writing gaming, doing stuff for Mongoose back in the day. And
writing under the OGL in that crazy proliferation of just like a zillion games and sort of D&D clones.
Yeah.
Are you going to have edition wars in your...
There will definitely be quite literal edition wars.
Excellent.
Where you take charge of armies, and at the same time in that era, you've got the whole explosion of indie RPGs. You've got The Forge, which segs into the 2010s, and the rise of stuff like Power by the Apocalypse. They were getting onto streaming and that whole...
How are you going to reflect these? I mean, I suppose that's why you're doing what you're doing and I don't do what you're doing. But how are you going to get these ideas into... I mean, there's mechanics. Readers, these bits will make a bit more sense. There are mechanics. Yeah. It's like a role-playing game, like any other role-playing game. It just has this very different way of going into it, as in you are going to be you, and you're also going to be your paragon, your representation in the fantasy or whatever world that you're adventuring in. Right. Okay. So how are you going to conjure these images or reflections of the gaming landscape? I mean, I don't know.
Let's take one of the things briefly, which is the whole OGL. The OGL was at the time and also now a really sort of controversial thing, because it basically on one level it freed D&D from TSR languages, because now Ireland could publish stuff. No longer any wandering tribes of lawyers going around suing everyone. Advocate the whole legal safe harbor. But at the same time, there was this both internal and external idea that if everyone is playing D&D, or take over the gaming industry by having everyone make supplements for our game as opposed to publishing their own games. So in the metafiction of the Die, you're in this fantasy setting, and these wizards come up with this enchantment that is called the other story.
That's quite on the nose.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like it, yeah.
A lot of this will be quite on the nose in some ways. And your characters will either have to choose to, carry this challenge out of the world, like, get it past, like, this dungeon full of lawyers who are trying to stop it. Or you can say, well, hang on, no, we're going to fight against them and stop them from enchanting the world with us.
Got it.
On a fundamental level, it still only needs to work as a regular dungeon. You still need to have, like, okay, here's what the player characters actually see, here's what they're doing, here are the NPCs they can talk to. It's just that all of that will be inspired and flavoured by a distorted version of real history.
That was an odd... I'm just thinking about that period of... It gave birth to a ton of gaming companies who were all like, oh, we don't have to have a game anymore. We don't have to come up with a game that we're going to have to sell against D&D. And some of them are still around, still publishing effectively old OGL material, right? I also wonder whether or not it was a very harsh lesson for a lot of people in how difficult it is to make money out of publishing RPGs, because it's not... Yeah,
there's the ancient joke of, like, how do you make $1 million in the gaming industry? You start with 2 million.
Right, exactly. I'm sure a lot of people thought the barrier to entry was the system. How can we fight against this behemoth that is Wizards D&D? And now we don't have to. So now we can kind of express our creativity. We can print books. I mean, we can effectively build our own versions. Yeah. I mean, that's what Paizo in the end ended up doing.
And then it's sort of got out of control, and you have this explosion of games which are semi-D&D compatible. And that's also to a degree where the whole OSR comes from, because now suddenly people can print D&D-esque stuff that harkens back to the old days.
Yes. Shadow Dark, which we've been playing a little bit of recently. It's a D20 thing with DCs or whatever, and then you just say, well, hold up, there's a lot of other stuff we're not going to include, and then we've got some other elements of flavor or kind of mechanics that are going to encourage something like your grandpa will remember.
Yeah, actually go back and, like, try and take that initial experience and streamline it, and
precisely, yeah.
It's fascinating how gaming sort of keeps orbiting back to the early days, that, like, where so many games are stood in the shadow of Gygax and Co.
We've been playing some Dragonbane. Are you familiar with Dragonbane? Well, just a free league game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically D&D. But it's based off a Swedish D&D, what do they used to call them? Fantasy Heartbreakers. A sort of D&D-like game that was produced in Sweden in the 80s. And Free League have kind of grabbed it. Yeah. There's a bit of their Year Zero mechanic in it, and there's a bit of D&D in it. It's very good fun. It's great. And the die role-playing game, kind of circling back to what we're talking about, it's got a dice pool mechanic, so people will be pretty familiar with how that should work. They played any Shadowrun.
Yeah, you roll D6s. You want to get high numbers, because
huge handfuls of D6s, which is what everybody wants.
The other gimmick in Die is that each class has their own special dice, which does...
Yes, talk to me about that.
In Die, there are 6 classes. There is the Dictator, who is kind of a hyped up, weird bard. There is the Fool, who's basically fighter, thief, player who is not taking it seriously, or isn't paying much attention to the game. It's like there is the Emotional Knight, who is sort of a fighter with a magic weapon, and they're fueled by a particular feeling, and there's this whole emotional wheel with different spokes. So you play different flavors of them. There is the Neo, who is this cyberpunk rogue type person. There is the Godbinder, who is kind of a cleric.
Right.
Clerics has demonologist. Right. And they've got the D10, and then the D20 is the Master, who is basically wizard / rules lawyer. I mean, each of them use their class die in different ways. Like the Fool is just gets a special D6 that, based off the dice, you can get like special blasts of good luck or bad luck.
Right.
The Emotional Knight uses their D8 as an emotional tracker, mainly to see how strong the emotion is at the moment.
Okay. And they play into the base mechanic. Yeah. Okay, got it. Immediately I thought of a couple of people who would suit the first couple of roles there. It does sound a little bit heartish, as in you're sort of fighting your own demons as much as the things that are placed in front of you.
Absolutely. Or it takes your demons and pastes their faces onto orcs, basically.
Which is something that I do at the weekend anyway.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
But what I'm really interested in is the dungeon is this quintessentially perfect way of writing a scenario. Because when you're writing a murder mystery or something, it remains a challenge to structure the information. We still haven't solved how to do that in a sort of universally agreed way. But dungeons, because they sort of concretize the decision making, the basic decision judge is do you go left or right? And you got it's very clear as to how you give the players the information. Listening at the left hand passageway, you hear the sound of something snorting. Down the right hand passageway, it's quiet, but the air down that way smells foul and chill.
Yeah, we're off. I'm already thinking about what I would do next.
So it's going to be fun to basically take Die, which is this very high concept, like, exploring character, exploring story, exploring literally meta-narrative in many, many ways. It's all about basically taking the meta of the real world and looking at it through a fancy lens and asking, what a roleplay game is for, and slamming that up against the clarity of the dungeon, and then feeding in all the history. The idea of doing a historical tutorial of gaming through the medium of gaming is just...
Yeah, you can't resist that.
It's such a lovely idea. We will see how well it works. It is going to be very, very interesting.
It's going to be interesting to see how you do it. And the word concretization, that is exactly it. What I find interesting is that a whole language that only exists inside that context has grown up over the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Like hinting and like inference and like tone of voice from the game's master dungeon, right?
Are you sure you want to do that? It's like this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. You can certainly try.
Yeah, indeed.
Literally the last session, one of our players said, we're going to do that. And I was like, are you certain you're going to do that? And the first thing he said was, well, now you asked me the question like that. No, I'm no longer certain. So meta gaming. I mean, I've played D&D for far too long to open that door. Yeah. Losing that connection with the character and just doing the whole thing as a sort of looking down like gods over the, like in Clash of the Titans. And that is obviously what this die system sort of actualizes. Yeah. So Metadungeon and Megadungeon. I love Megadungeons.
Me too.
There's Barrow Maze. We've tried Barrow Maze recently. We didn't do very well. It's absolutely huge. We only scratched the surface. There's the Emerald Spire, is the Paizo one for whatever. There's the Abomination Vaults or something. That's a kind of mega dungeon. I remember reading an article. I've always liked the idea of this sort of dungeon ecosystem. Like basically people move about. They don't just sit. I mean, this is now a truism, but the idea that people wouldn't just sit there waiting for you to turn up, but they would, be doing stuff.
That was a reaction against the really early dungeons. Like I was reading Palace of the Vampire Queen, which is basically very, 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 very first published dungeon. And it is basically, it's like, opening paragraph, like, there's a vampire queen, she's kidnapped this prince and you got to go rescue him. You go, okay, fair enough. And then the rest of the dungeon is just like, room A, 2 rats, room B, 4 orcs. And there's no attempt at story or logic or reactivity.
Nobody ever thought, how do those 2 rats survive in that room next to those 4 orcs? They would have been eaten by now. It should be room 1 empty. Room 2, 4 orcs eating 2 rats.
And so the question, is the dungeon a snapshot in time? Is it like, you went to the dungeon and now this is what's happening right this moment?
There was an article in White Dwarf in I'm saying it must have been the 80s, by somebody called Roger Musson, called The Dungeon Architect. And that was... it's a sprawling underground environment with inhabitants. The inhabitants have got things that they're up to, and there is a pecking order, there is a food chain, people move about. It is more interesting. I've always thought the one problem with it is that if you are concretizing your challenges and your decision making into a dungeon environment, and then you say that effectively the first time anybody sets off anything that makes a loud bang, everybody there is going to pile in, then it's all over. So people sort of do have to sort of, for some reason, not move. Otherwise, the layering of the challenges, so progression is broken. It's a very odd thing. The entire thing is
the whole sort of stepping stone between like war games and board games. If you're playing chess, and I take your pawn, you can't go, okay, the other pawns will see that and then they come over and help. You can't roll again.
Right, they scatter. In terms of your other work, so you've done a lot of other stuff. It is interesting what you've worked on and how many different systems you've worked within. How much does system drive your thinking when you are writing adventures? Or how much do you have an adventure kind of high concept and you think, right, what am I writing it for? I'm writing it for... I mean, there are some games where the setting is implied in like Paranoia, the setting is implied in the game, but there are others that are much wider open. How much do you think about mechanics when you're writing an adventure?
The first thing to think about is how is this going to work at the table? That regardless of what system you're playing, regardless of what the setting is, regardless of the high concept, the first question is like, how do you convey information to the GM? How do the GM transfer the information to the players? Do the players have interesting things to do? Do they have choices? Do they know what those choices are? Are they informed choices? That's sort of the starting point. After that, you want to sort of lean into the distinct bits of the system So, for example, when I'm doing stuff for the One Ring, then it'd like go, okay, we need to basically cram as much Tolkien stuff in here as to feel like Tolkien.
Yeah.
I find myself like, when doing Ring stuff, I'll write a separate book at the same time, like I did Dagger of the Heart for Heart at the same time as doing Moria, because Moria had to be deadly serious and sober and as Tolkien-esque as possible. So whenever I had a weird idea that wouldn't fit with Tolkien, I would have this wackier game where I could throw weirder stuff in.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So when you're writing, everybody writes D&D stuff or role-playing game stuff. Yeah. You drop in encounters here and there. You come up with an idea that isn't on the page. If you're running something that's pre-whatever, or you write your own, like a zillion people.
And that's one thing that I leans into, and this method will into it. Basically, this is a uniquely creative hobby. You can't be passive. It's all about creating at the table.
So when you're writing for effectively another, you're trying to communicate through a medium. So you're trying to communicate through the printed page or whatever it might be to another gaming group through the vessel, the conduit of a games director, master, dungeon, monster, whatever you call it, whichever game. How much do you worry about meta thinking? Because that's the thing that always brings me up short. This works, but my players are going to see through this within about 5 seconds flat. I'll give you an example. Poltergeists. There is a chapter in the Age of Worms which effectively totally revolves around the players buying a piece of deception around whether or not there are poltergeists. And the issue, of course, is as soon as anybody knows that there is a poltergeist, nobody acts normally. You've blown the idea. You may have a great story idea. The writer may have a great idea about how this story could unfold and what surprises await the characters and how they can be deceived and how to do a 180 on them at certain points, whatever it might be. But as soon as the players know what poltergeists are, they understand how this works and they will start amending their behavior. They'll start changing their behavior. How much when you're writing something, be it for a traveler or for Moria or for whatever, do you kind of think, this is not going to work? Because as soon as I put that cue, that piece of description...
Again, it depends on how likely I feel the players are going to cop that. You can't write one singular path to an adventure. You can go for okay, I think that 70% of groups, 90% of groups are going to take this particular path, but you also have to have support for the 10% who take the other path. It was doing where the players have to not raise their poltergeist in the room. Okay, here's how adventure would probably play it. Here is the alternate path adventure where you got for the players who have worked it out from the start, and you slid enough material in there to challenge them. Yeah. And then you also want a small bit of material for the players who completely off the track and fundamentally the job is supporting the GM at the table. And you don't quite know what the GM is going to do. You don't know what the players are going to do.
Do you playtest the stuff you write?
Yes, but playtesting is limited in... if you playtest for your table, you've playtested for your table.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Pretty everything gets put out to multiple playtest groups, but even then, that's only going to catch the obvious flaws. Once it goes into someone's hands, it's out of your control. You can't know exactly what they're going to do with it.
How much do you think about the GM that has got a copy of whatever piece of material you've written, giving them the freedom to sort of improvise, adapt, add stuff, remove stuff? Is it don't mess with it or do mess with it?
Depends on the game. If you're writing a to B scenario, and you're going, okay, in the ideal world, the GM can pick this up and run this and not really have to create anything with okay, if the players do this, turn to chapter 4 and run that fight. If the players do this.
Fighting fantasy,
That is basically supposed to be so the GM can basically run that without, obviously they can change it if they want. There'll be a bit of support material in there for all ways you can go through it. But the idea there is this product is going to be as smooth and pre-packaged experience as we can do. Other books will be totally different. We did Dracula Dossier for Desperate Agents a while back. Dracula Dossier is this wholly improvised campaign. The gimmick there is the players are given a copy of Dracula as a handout. I've got all annotations in the margins. Each annotation is numbered and the numbers point to locations in the source book. And there the players can follow any lead. They can follow any clue. You build up the mystery of where Dracula is and how to hunt him over the course of the campaign. Nothing is set in stone. And there's lots of advice to the GM and as much support as we can give them. But it's not a prescripted thing.
There's a traveller adventure that I just read Murder on Arcturus Station, which is set on a space station. You've got like a series of suspects and a series of victims, and it's a recipe book. It's not like who murdered Captain Snoodleface. Captain Snoodleface is one of like something like 15 prospective victims, and you've got 15 prospective culprits and different evidence to support different things, and you pick which one. You can run it over and over again if you like. So that Dracula example sounds like it's a toolkit.
Some groups want toolkits, some groups want proven scripts. Some GMs, when they're learning a system, want to start with a pre-written script and then move on to a toolkit. Some stories that need those toolkits, some stories that need scripts. There are sort of middle grounds as well, where like, here is what I call the cool probabilities, where like, at the start of an adventure, you know exactly what the players are, what they're doing, where they are. And then as the adventure goes on, that gets more and more fuzzy because the players can take different paths to the adventure. And some adventures you want to constrain that. You want to make sure that like a dungeon does a very good job constraining stuff. Like, if your adventure is all in a dungeon, the players aren't going to leave the dungeon, they're not going to go off, go to the nearest town, recruit a army of 200 peasants and marks into the dungeon. Yeah. But in a more open adventure, you could do that. Yeah. Fundamentally, it's all about support of the GM but different GMs have different needs depending on how much time and investment they want to give it.
And so when you're going to point yourself at this Metadungeon project, which I'm sure you've got ideas you've obviously got ideas kind of swooping around your head everywhere. You've probably got notes all over the place. But with what we've just been talking about in mind, how are you going to approach this project?
To a degree, the structure of this is dictated by just the chronology, which is nice because you have a clear sort of progression through the ages. Yep. Basically, the first thing you will be setting up the rules for creating your personas. It'll be basically the level by level. And because the levels are all independent to a degree, as you expect to progress to the dungeon in order, although there will be secret doors and
Can you go back up and go back down? Are the answers or the solutions? Oh, you mustn't give away anything.
It's good. That's actually going to be tricky because there will be a story progressing through it. But yes, you will be able to go back up and down to a degree.
Right.
And also shortcut through stuff. Like some sections will be paranoia, for example. There's going to be a section based on paranoia.
Right.
That's basically a self-contained room in the dungeon. You go in, there's be some counter there that is reminiscent of paranoia. There'll be a little box text. And if players haven't played paranoia before, the GM will go, this is this game, which is released by Western Games, blah, blah, blah. Here's the joke of paranoia. You go up and learn more about it, but now you've experienced it tangentially through die. Other parts of the thing will be more heavily storified. There'll be more plot there. That'll be the main spine of the adventure. And going back and forth there will be more complicated, but should still be doable. He said, "100 elephants."
The more you talk about it, the bigger this thing sounds. Like, it just sounds enormous. How long do you think you would expect a group, if they were going to sit down and sharpen their cutlery and start in on this thing? What are you thinking in terms of duration? And bear in mind that you're talking to somebody who's just been traumatized by 6.5 years.
It's not going to be 6.5 years. Die moves at a lightning pace.
Right.
A, because you're playing fairly powerful cards from the get-go. B, because it is very much about story and the emotional impact as opposed to like clearing 10 by 10 runs or whatever.
Yes.
This is the sort of dungeon where you could have the GM going, okay, you hack your way through many, many corridors. It's about the emotional tenor of encounters as opposed to the tactic, clearing the two goblins.
It's not a mega dungeon crawl. It's a mega dungeon experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
The 70s bit will have sections where you're going square by square. That will just be to give the impression of what gaming was like back in the day as opposed to...
Yes, I'm with you, yeah. A taste of the original experience without actually having to sit and grind your way through room 16B. Yeah. This room is empty apart from two barrels.
Apart from the two rats, one of which has has eaten the other.
Yeah, one has eaten the other, and then the orcs have turned them into a pie.
So you should be able to play through it relatively quickly. I'm guessing it's going to be...
Yeah, it's like how many pages?
It's currently budgeted 200 pages. Oof. It's chunky, but not staggeringly long. I'm guessing it's going to be at least 12, 18 sessions of
Wow. Okay. We're playing Shadow Dark at the moment. We're playing Twilight 2000 of all the things.
A contrast there. How's Shadow Dark?
Shadow Dark is fun. We've done a couple of sessions. We've done session 0. We've done another character generation for Twilight 2000, which is very like the Traveller, long form character generation with career choices and all that kind of stuff, which is very good fun as well. We've got those two bubbling away, and at some point there's an adventure path called Outlaws of Alkenstar by Paizo. I'm going to move it from the implied Wild Western setting to Georgian. There'll be lots of gin palaces and jewels and tricorn hats and wigs and right. So the bones of it, you pull up. So one part of what we were talking about earlier about the ability for a GM to kind of pull stuff apart, put it back together again. Sometimes it is just like, okay, so hold up. There's a bit where they go to this place and they meet this person and they learn this thing and they get given this bit of lore and they get given this magical what's it. Yeah. But that doesn't have to be in that castle with that person doing that thing. It can be over on this island in this spire with this geezer.
It's fascinating how some things are fungible, some things aren't. And like I did parts of Drinax for Traveller.
Yeah.
And that's a campaign where basically you're handed a ship, you're handed this map of a part of the galaxy. It's like, go off, do piracy, recruit clouds to your side.
Yeah.
And when I was designing that, I was going, okay, the gimmick here is sort of the map.
Yeah.
And I assumed that we'd have to do it in Traveller because it's all so tied to that particular map, that particular configuration of systems. But people got off and taken the adventures and gone, we'll transfer the Star Wars, we'll transfer to my home group. They're going, on one level, yay, absolutely, go and do it. But how are you doing that? Because like you have to do so much work converting. If you were to go there, I wouldn't start with this thing. I would take a more generic adventure. But
I ran some old Coriolis, Third Horizon, but the adventure support for Coriolis was not massive. There was effectively 2 or 3 things that they produced in a sort of adventure path format. There was like
the icons, whatever it's called, something.
That's the fella.
Yeah.
And I thought, I just want to run it for an afternoon to see how we get on with it. And I stole an old West End game Star Wars adventure. Yeah. But taking the pirates of Drinax and moving them to somewhere, I mean, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, well, I was surprised, but people have. In some ways, I wonder is almost a sort of creative challenge for people to go, I want to take this thing which is designed for this, like, carefully choose this particular purpose and warp it, and
see if I can do it.
Yeah. Or to just like buy random books off the shelves and go, right, I will use this no matter what.
Yes.
Have hammered this into shape.
When you're writing like open worldy, Drinax-y stuff.
Yeah.
How genuinely open world are these things? Because I've always kind of thought that with sandboxes, one of our readers once described our style of play as more a litter tray than a sandbox, which is not particularly complimentary. But with sandbox stuff, I've always kind of thought, well, actually what you're doing is you've got a box. There's only one way out of it, into box 2, which will also appear or give the impression of being genuinely open. You can go a million different ways on any way you like in box 1. Yeah. But ultimately you're going to end up at this point. You've felt like you've got there through your own decision making, but really all roads lead to here.
Yeah.
Do you think in that way when you're doing this stuff, or is it genuinely like, no, I'm just going to stick it out there? And
you do it either way. If you're trying to have a story or like a degree of progression, then you need to basically, what you're basically talking about there is the sort of pinch point where basically no matter which path the players take to the first part of the adventure, they'll have to go through this narrow aperture. Yeah. So then you sort of reset. But if you equally do campaigns where basically anything goes, and that's more of a sort of like a sort of almost a setting book.
Yes.
With a little sprinty adventure. Again, it really depends on the product and the setting. There's no right way to do it. It'll be dictated by the needs of the particular product or the setting. Like, if you do stuff in the One Ring, because that has to fit in with the existing Tolkien material.
Yes.
Then that has to be constrained and it has to everything has to line up. But for something like Eyes of the Stone Thief, which is set in the Dragon Empire, it's the setting 13th Age, but the Dragon Empire is very woolly, anything goes. And that campaign has a dozen different possible endings, many of which are, and then the world gets destroyed, and then everything is peace and light forever and ever and ever.
It's interesting because we've got two, talking about Twilight 2000 and Shadow Dark, the 2 different players in our group started off, and they are both saying that it's going to be, you pick where you want to go next, and I will support the character choices. I will build out like Gromit laying the track in front of the train as it runs along. Yeah. I'm sure it'll work out well. Be interesting to see how much work is involved in keeping that kind of...
It's always a trade-off between basically making life easy for the GM with prepackaged stuff or being collaborative. Here's a toolkit to build what you want.
Yeah.
The best thing I've ever written is the Dracula dossier.
Yeah.
And the genius bit there, which is, you've got this pyramid where you slot in the various elements.
Right.
And
yeah.
at the top of that is always Dracula. The campaign will always end with you guys fighting Dracula, no matter what path you take through it. But the paths up to there are entirely up to the players. But because it's pyramid shape, you get sort of constrained the higher you go up. So basically, it'll always...
That's a clever way of doing it.
Yeah, there's this like you have this empty structure at the start, and you fill that in with whatever bits you're interested in from the toolkit. And I've always been looking for other places where that same structure will work, and it's hard to come up with stories where that probably works because it's based around the villain, and Dracula's a great villain, and there's aren't that many.
And naturally sits at the top of a pyramid, and if you've got a very open starting point with a million different annotations in a book, that makes sense. So what game do you play? What game are you playing now?
Right now, I'm theoretically playing Mythic Bastionland, although we've missed the last 2 sessions due to just players missing, which is annoying.
Right.
And I've also been playing like a bunch of one-shots down the local D&D club, and a few weeks ago, I was at my local con and I was running Terraforming Mars, which I'm also working on, and my Halfling murder mystery game, Maryshire, which was also coming from later in the year.
And how much of what you play, as it were, for recreation, how much does that intertwine with your work output? Do you write stuff for your run stuff and just think, well, this is a very interesting idea, or...
It depends. I mean, it's always going to be inspiring or valuable at some level.
Yeah.
But sometimes you sort of say, okay, I need to play test this. I need, guys, here's what we're playing tonight because I need to see if this works.
Yeah. Got it.
And other times you just want to, I just want to basically be a regular player in something and just sort of sit back and actually, put the work stuff aside. You
were talking earlier on about how when you were doing work on Moria, which is, it's like, hey, the brief is pretty tight. And you could sort of channel the sort of slightly crazier or more whimsical ideas that you had into the heart work that you were doing.
Yeah.
Is that how you normally work? Do you find that you're working on one thing in a very focused way for blocks of time, or do you find that you've got 2 or 3 things on the go and you sit down for a day and you've kind of a bit of this and a bit of that, and then an idea has occurred to you and you fix a problem with Project C and then you move on to Project D? Or, I mean, how does it all...
At the moment, I'm doing far too much simultaneously.
Right.
And the other thing is because with novels for to you write the novel and you hand it off and it goes off the editor. It's like a process. Role-playing games tend to be have more balancing back and forth where basically, we need to patch this bit, we need to talk about the art notes for this, we need to basically, we set up playtesting, come back and make change based on the playtesting.
Right.
It's rare you sort of get to go, okay, I've done it, it's now done, it's away from me forever.
Got it.
Until it actually comes out.
Is that kind of positive experience? If something comes back to you after you've been away from it for a while, then I can kind of jump into it again?
Usually, it depends on how I do at the time. Because the great thing about role-playing, and those the curse of role-playing, is that it is like multiple forms of writing at once. You've got rule stuff, setting stuff, adventure stuff.
Yeah.
I find if I'm doing nothing but adventures, I sort of find myself craving rules and going, it's so hard. You have to think about all the plots, anticipate what's going to happen. I just want to get to basic, meat and potatoes rules, and then you spend too much time in rules, you get bored, you're going, this is just maths, and just maths and numbers. I want to do setting stuff.
Yeah.
It's like a setting stuff, pure creatively. There's no, it doesn't need to conform to a plot, it doesn't need to, be dictated by rules, be anything you want. And then you do that for a while, you go, I need structure, this is all far too...
Yeah. And you write fiction, right?
Yeah.
And in fiction, is it now finally the characters are going to do what I tell them to do? Or do you approach building your stories and plots in the same way that you approach your game work?
Well, I wanted to do fiction for ages and I had huge trouble with it because I was so used to role-playing games that I'd go, right, okay, I can build this wonderful, here's this setting of alchemists, weirdest monsters. Now what do you do? And there are no players there to answer that question. So my sort of hook into writing fiction with the main character was really, really impulsive. So I could basically you react to what she was doing, where she would jump at the first plot hook that she encountered. The big difference really is just the different priorities of a story structure. In a role-playing game, you want to give the players as many choices as you can. You want there to be multiple equally valid paths through the story. You want to go, okay, you could do this or you could do this. There's no right or wrong answer. Whereas the fiction, you want to constrain stuff. You want to be being right answer for this character in the moment. This is the only possible thing they could have done based on who they are and what they want. And a lot of it is setting up a role-playing game is for tightening the screws of the character. But okay, I know this is the more interesting path for them. How can I set up their personality and their backstory so they will take the most interesting path to the story.
Yeah, and then the other thing is about writing fiction, surely, is that the outcomes are all determined. In role-playing games, it's on the whim potentially of a dice. You know, they die, they live, they find the secret passage, they don't. Whereas in a fiction, you can be like, this character is going to die here. In this confrontation, this is the end of it.
It's weird, like, you do find yourself be surprised in fiction, like, you know, you're writing, you go, oh, hang on, suddenly realize this character's going to die in this scene. It just makes so much more sense emotionally for the character to die in the scene. And then you can go back and sort of, you know, set all that up.
Yes.
I went on this deep dive about how Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings, because you have all his early drafts. You can sort of see how the story develops. You can see how stuff that seemed inevitable when you're actually reading the novel was very, very fungible and uncertain when you're actually doing the writing.
Right.
For example, like Aragorn started out as Trotter, who's this hobbit with wooden shoes.
Okay.
And he changes.
Yeah.
And they get the bit where they're on the mountain, forced away to the snow. And they go, oh, Boromir suddenly becomes like the main hero because Boromir can force away to the snow.
Yeah.
And my hobbit hero, who was so cool earlier on, is now just more like one of the little people. I'll change Aragorn to a man. And he changed Aragorn to a human. And
right.
And like all the stuff about Gondor and so forth.
Then it stems from that.
Yeah. Whereas role-playing games never have that opportunity. No. There's real role-playing games like, you know, what happens at the table is what happens.
Yeah. That's just...
It's a fascinating...
Are you writing fiction in parallel with the game work?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow. So your brain must just constantly be... Do you ever get mixed up between the different things?
I try. One of the key to do any writing for hire is finding the sort of the things that people love in the setting or that make the setting distinct.
Yeah.
So, for example, at the moment, I'm doing research for Metadungeon.
Yeah.
I'm doing novel.
Yeah.
I'm doing Terraforming Mars, the role-playing game, and doing Mary Shout, the halfling murder thing.
Terraforming Mars, like the Kim Stanley Robinson novels.
The board game, which is like inspired by the Kim Stanley Robinson things.
Okay.
And we're doing the role-playing game based on the board game. Oh. So yeah, it is.
Wow, cool.
But so each of them, you have to sort of identify the selling point, the emotional hook into that thing. And then you go, like, when you're writing that, you go, oh, wait, here, what is the purpose? What is the unique thing about this particular thing?
Yeah,
so
right.
For the Terraforming Mars, it's all about engineering. It's about long-term planning. It's about basically these stories of like momentary crisis in the process of building something.
Yeah.
Whereas the halfling thing is all about like, you know, cuteness and like intrigue and like, you know, humorous murders and like, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like Midsummer.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's Midsummer with hobbits.
That's precisely it. But when you're trying to write all these things at the same time, you need to have this sort of strong emotional hook for each of them, so you can just get into that mindset. Like, I've got different like musical playlists, different like, you know, either key text or bits of art I look at before start to work on a thing. Go, okay. My brain.
So you've got your way of kind of getting yourself into the. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And you're going to start working. So this is all on. This is all on Backer Kit.
Yeah, there's a deal Backer Kit as part of the Metadungeon month. There's a bunch of other Metadungeons, and we're doing Metadungeon.
Yeah, the Metadungeon is part of the Megadungeon. Wow,
exactly,
that's easy for me to say. The Metadungeon is part of the Megadungeon month, which I've been reading about, and there's, I think, like Dungeon Crawl Classics and other people are producing kind of Megadungeon style material. It sounds quite, and it's meant to encourage people to kind of write stuff themselves. It's cool.
Indeed.
I think the Backer Kit starts on the 7th of April, finishes on 6th of May.
That sounds about right.
So you basically have a month to get into this thing. And if people want to know a bit more, want to get a bit more of a flavour of the die role-playing game, is there some kind of quick start rule?
There's the quick start. There is the ongoing comic, which is now its second arc, die loaded.
Right. Readers, I'll find links to these things, and you can get yourself acquainted with the system, because that's always going to make much more sense. Readers, if you want to learn more about Gareth's work, fiction, game design, everything, visit garhanrahan.com. And I guess it all wraps up then in May, and then you've got the summer to start working on this giant thing, this enormous problem you set for yourself that you have to get done with publication later in the year, I presume.
That's the plan, yeah.
Got it. Well, thanks, Gareth, for talking to us about this amazing thing. And I like the fact that we meandered off into many, many other areas.
Again, that's sort of entirely fitting with a product that is about meandering through byways of gaming industry.
Exactly. It's you're selling the idea. It's best communicated by basically rambling about it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming in. Readers, I implore you to check out the Backer Kit for the Metadungeon, the Die Metadungeon. You Google it, or I'll put a link to the Backer Kit page in our show notes. what awaits us in the next episode? Is it going to be some Shadow Dark, perhaps with Paul? Is it going to be some Twilight 2000 with Dan? Is it going to be some Pathfinder 2 with me? Well, we're not going to find out now. We will find out whether or not I can shake off this cold and which game is going to appear in your podcast feed next when we pick things up next time. That's been great. I've really enjoyed this.
It's been lovely.
The Billowing Hilltop podcast is a Billowing Hilltop production. Music is from Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com and is used with thanks under the Creative Commons license. Additional music and sound effects come from the wonderful Sirenscape. All other original material is copyright Billowing Hilltop. Role-playing games are all about getting people together, and we use Roll20 as our tabletop, the perfect place to host your game, and Discord to host our chat. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, Hugh from Podderation here, and if you like today's show, why not have a listen to the All Things Nintendo podcast? Hosted by Brian Shea, former director and Game Informer and lifelong games journalist, the show explores the ins and outs of gaming's oldest company and one of its biggest, featuring interviews, featuring reviews, featuring everything you want to know about the world of Nintendo. If you'd like to learn more, check out our website at podderation.com.